Please, please. Okay. Good. Right, well, good afternoon. I hope I'm all mic'd up. I think I am, and you can hear me. Good afternoon. I'm Paula Dobriansky. I'm on the board of the Atlantic Council and also the Executive Committee. And it really gives me great pleasure to open this forum today. And in fact, on behalf of the Dinu Patriciu Eurasia Center, today's forum, as you know, will be focused on where is Russia headed. And we are fortunate indeed to have Russia's former foreign minister, Andrei Kozyrev, who served as Russia's foreign minister under President Boris Yeltsin from October of 1991 to January of 1996. And I think that his watch can be characterized as truly a time of historic transformation in Russia, economically, politically, and also strategically. And he was a very active participant and contributor to those very dramatic events which took place. In 1991, the former foreign minister stood by President Yeltsin against, as we remember, the very infamous failed hardline coup. He also took part in the December 1991 meeting of the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, where the decision was taken at the time to dissolve the Soviet Union. And on December 26, 1991, he was appointed the very first foreign minister of the new Russia. He pursued a policy, I think it can be characterized, of equal cooperation with the newly liberated independent states. He also worked very assiduously in support of a strategic partnership with the United States. His counterparts at the time were Jim Baker, Warren Christopher, and Larry Eagleburger. And another part of his portfolio during that period was focused on Russia's relationship with China, South Korea, and Japan. And as you know, Russia had taken various political shifts and turns. And as you ended your foreign ministership on January 6, 1996, prior to that time, the foreign minister had run for very competitive elections in the Murmansk district and ultimately was very successful in representing the city of Murmansk in the Duma, the new Russian parliament. And he served there for four years. He was certainly, both with his hat as foreign minister and also his tenure in the Duma, he was someone who was a supporter of the campaign for liberal democracy in Russia and also an alliance with the West. As we know that, again, the politics had taken many different turns during your tenure, and he ultimately, after his 4 years in the Duma, he abandoned politics at the end of that Duma mandate. From 2000 to the present, he has been in business as a private entrepreneur and also a board member of various Russian and international companies. I did want to add two last things to his bio. You have some portions of his bio in front of you. But I also want to mention that the former foreign minister is a graduate of Moscow State Institute of International Relations. In 1974, he was a PhD in history. And he joined the MFA in 1974. And also had a number of posts, including positions in the Department of International Organizations. He also became rather known when he wrote a series of articles, and in particular, this was during Gorbachev's Glasnost period in 1989 summer. He wrote an article which was repudiating the Leninist concept of international class struggle. That particular article was reprinted and published in the Washington Post. So we're very interested in hearing your perspective on where Russia's headed. Please join me in welcoming former Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrev. I think the mic is on. They will turn.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I won't sing, right?
It
because
is.
otherwise they will run. So is it okay now?
Yes.
It's okay. Okay, right? Huh? Not okay. Oh, I'm sorry. You see, I have signals from somewhere that they don't hear well, right? Maybe if you go down there, you will check it. It's okay? Okay. I'm sorry for that, but it's beyond my control. There are those nice ladies there. But they were so nice to me all the time of preparation that I totally rely on them. Of course, except for the factual part of Paula's introduction, the rest is exaggeration, which you would expect under the circumstances. And what could you expect from a former foreign minister? Is probably a couple of historic anecdotes. And many of you probably looking at me think that I am a daydreamer, that in comparison with what we wanted and what I had in mind, which Paula so well described, that is partnership, even alliance with the West, with the United States in particular, and the NATO, and you compare it with what is happening right now. Was I a daydreamer, or am I a daydreamer? I don't think so. I actually think that at the end of 80s, beginning early 90s, there was a window of opportunity, and I was speaking as clear on that matter as I am now doing it. It's none of my invention. I was actually first appointed not by President Yeltsin, because at that time the appointments were done by the so-called Supreme Soviet, which is a kind of hybrid Soviet-style parliament. And so the parliament at that time voted for me, which speaks for itself, because maybe even a little more than half of the parliament was represented by the members of the Communist Party. So that means, and the opposition, which I belong to, like democratic opposition, it was not particularly well organized either. So you might say that conservative majority of the parliament voted for a guy like me to be a foreign minister with my agenda, which I was very clear upon, including partnership and even alliance as much as possible with the West. Why that happened? Because a lot of people at that time, it was probably overwhelming feeling that radical change was on the agenda, and that we have to part. I mean, we, like Russian people, Russia has had to part with the Soviet past, which led nowhere, including the confrontation with the West, which was unaffordable, to put it mildly. So the chance for the change and the will for the change was there. I made a test in as early as 1993. It was actually first really free and competitive election to the new parliament under the new constitution. The Duma, which is still there, but it's very different because that was first free and fair election. Then there was second free and fair election in 1996, which I also won in Murmansk area. But that was almost it for real free and fair elections in Russia, be it parliamentary or presidential. So at that time there was a window, but we had to do a couple of things. We had to transform the economy, which was done. It was kind of Yegor Gaidar's portfolio mostly, which was done, but half done. And it's still there in today's Russia. Today's Russia supposed to be a market economy, but it's quasi-market economy, despite the level of legal or alleged privatization exceeds even that of countries like Italy and some other free market countries. But the real situation is that the property rights are still more than shaky, as we see every now and then. The state still controls large parts of economy, and the state controls definitely the most lucrative, so to say, most profitable monopolies, and regained control over oil exports, which was almost lost partly again by the mid-90s. So the state still dominates economic situation in Russia. And reporting from my last 15 years, I had successful business practice as an entrepreneur, but with my partners, I stood away from, consciously stood away from oligarchic structures and government structures. But there is place for private entrepreneurship, for successful private entrepreneurship, but we very soon with my partners learned that we have to keep under radar, what we called to keep under radar. To keep under radar means that even if you have potential to grow to a large institution, like I was in banking part of the time, you better don't. Despite that's the law probably for any private enterprise to try to grow, but you better don't, because then there will be too much of state interest in you. So today the situation even worse in that sense. It was worsening gradually, but today it's really bad. I rounded up my individual business endeavors. I still consult one or two companies on the situation in Russia, but I can't tell much of good news for them, and now they learn it themselves, how difficult it is. So in that part, it was partial success, but basically failure, and that's economic base for preservation of the remnants or legacy or large part of the the Soviet kind of system. There is no more red flags, but there are whatever other flags, sometimes a little bit brownish, and unfortunately more and more brownish. But that in economic terms, in terms of control of the country, it doesn't matter. In control is bureaucracy, and it's corrupt bureaucracy. And it's security part of bureaucracy in particular. So that's the same situation I lived in my best years of my life, of course, in the Soviet Union. Now, in foreign policy, we also had a partial success. It was my portfolio. We signed with the United States and other countries and NATO a lot of documents expressing intention, and I believe it was genuine intention from our side. It was genuine intention from the other side. But due to domestic dynamic, to the failure in the first part, that is in economy and control, we never lived up to the promise of real democracy and to the promise of market-oriented or market-based, fully market-based economy. And that's why the window was closing, and I tried to maneuver my last years, especially in 1994, 1995. But then I thought the room for maneuver became so narrow that I went to the second election, and I think Yeltsin was glad to appoint a Soviet veteran, Evgeny Primakov. So that's the story. I mean, and the Russian foreign policy from then on went backwards to the Soviet type of policy. Again, no red flags, but amazingly, even today, some of those proxies, some of those foreign allies are the same family of Assads in Syria. It's mind-boggling, actually. An anecdote which I promised, in 1993, probably, I went to Syria to meet the father, and we had a discussion, and he said, "Andrei, I cannot believe my eyes and my ears. For 25 years about another Andrei, first young guy, then elder and elder, was used to come to me from Moscow. That is Andrei Gromyko, of course. And he told me that I am here at the front line of fight against imperialism, American imperialism in the first place, and Zionism, which is which was an agent of the big monster. So that I have to stand here firm, that I have to fight if need be, and that they, I mean, like Moscow, will provide me with the weapons. So I was like a soldier on duty with a gun to stand against the enemy. Now, another Andrei comes from the same place, from Moscow, and virtually what you are telling me is that the whole thing was totally wrong, that I have to be, that you are an ally or potential ally with the monster, that you support the Zionist entity there, that is Israel in his words, and that I have to change, like totally reverse the political course. And more than that, now you say that I owe you money for the weapon you gave me to be on my duty. Because I wanted him, we were very, very short of course, of financial resources. So we wanted the debt. It was miscounted. I mean, it was total mess in calculus, but it was about at least $10 billion, maybe more, maybe less. I said, yeah, well, we are prepared to discuss because it was counted in those rubles. I mean, it's kind of difficult. But nevertheless, it was absolutely clear that it exceeds $10 billion. And I said, we are ready to discuss it in kind or whatever. I mean, there are lots of ways, not necessarily immediately, but gradually and something. And he was just absolutely astonished at it. He said, I think it was genuine on his side. That's unbelievable. So I can imagine how he exhaled when my successor came to him, because he was his old friend. As he said, he was bragging to be a friend of Milosevic and Saddam and Assad. And from then on, I think the Assad family calmed down. And they are now, of course, counting on Noah Andreis, but Sergei's and other people who are coming to them from Moscow. So here we are. And my last remark probably would be that Medvedev, the prime minister, he spoke about danger of sliding to the Cold War, to the new Cold War, he said, sliding to the new Cold War recently in Munich, the conference on security. And I rarely agree with today's government, especially in foreign policy, but I tend to agree with Medvedev, except that I would make a little correction. It's not a new Cold War. It's just the old Cold War, old good Cold War as we know it. And why? Because Russia is by largely in the same place. It's state bureaucracy controlled, as I said, economy and social life there, and it's relevant to that anti-Western foreign policy. So it's just continuation of the old story. Of course, there are differences, there are nuances, there are limits also. It's not the Soviet Union, but still. So yes, I agree. It's more and more sliding back to where we started. Is it the end of the day? I hope not. I hope that there will be sooner or later a younger Andrei, which will come to Assad from Moscow and say, okay, we now reversed the course. Fundamentally, we succeeded. So please do the same. That's more or less what I wanted to say. And I'm not a lecturer, I'm a businessman, so I would prefer that Paula guides me with questions, or you guys especially, as there are as knowledgeable people here as Mr. Gatti, for instance, Professor Gatti. I even feel shy to speak to such an audience because you know better. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening, please. Minister Kozyrev, really thank you for your opening reminiscences and giving us a feel for not only during your time, but your perspective on some of the developments now. And I'm going to propose, I have some questions I want to propose to the minister, and then we're going to go to all of you. Let me begin with maybe the economy, and then we'll go to the politics in Russia. But the economy, you referenced it. I mean, clearly the oil and gas prices have gone down, which has impacted it. Sanctions have been imposed by the EU and the United States as a result of Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And then it's also compounded by corruption as well, which you referred to, as well as, I would say, mismanagement too. So given that backdrop, where is the economy going? Some experts have described that Russia cannot sustain this, that it's going to explode or implode at some juncture. On the other hand, there are those who say, well, there's always been a resiliency there. What do you think? Where is the economy? What is Russia's future economy?
Well, first of all, I think that the stagnating economy began before the drop of the oil prices and before the sanctions. That actually was the tendency was pronounced even in 2011, 2012, 2010 and 11. It was kind of still some growth after the financial crisis, but from definitely 2012, the growth stopped. It did not reverse at that time, but it stopped, despite at that point the oil price went back to more than 100, 120, 140 even at times. So the problem with the economy is not even the oil price or the sanctions, definitely not sanctions. There are fundamental structural problems. If you read reports of IMF, World Bank, even Russian Central Bank and Russian Ministry of Economy, and even if you read carefully what Mr. Putin was saying 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when he was just appointed by Yeltsin to be a successor, and what he actually keeps saying quite frankly, is that the problem with the economy is structural, a fundamental structural situation, which I briefly tried to describe. We failed, our government, our movement at that time, we failed to provide full-scale or enough. We failed to provide reforms which would cross the infamous red line and make the reforms, make the market-oriented economy and thus a basis for democracy irreversible. Unfortunately, it was reversible and it reverses now. Now, of course, as long as the oil price was there and was growing, the Russian, you might put it the economy or whatever, income, government income, budget income, yes, population, large parts of population income was growing, and that was the phenomenon of the early 2000. Also, Putin, in the beginning, first few years after he became president, he tried some reforms with the help of some moderately, probably reform-minded aides, like Alexei Kudrin, for instance, and some others. So there was a little bit of attempt for for furthering structural reform, but it soon dried out, and it was covered by the oil price. The oil price provided unearned, so to say, revenue, a windfall, which covered the picture, and that's how everybody, except for some skeptics like my humble self, thought that Russia is on right track, that Russian economy is growing. But the private entrepreneurs, the private sector, even those who are, especially those who are under radar, that's why today small and medium-sized businesses in Russia account for at best 15% of the economy, compared to 40 to 60% in free market Western countries. I mean, we read it very clearly at that time when the Khodorkovsky was put in jail. That was a graphic signal that the rules of the game actually never changed, that it's the old game. It's not a new game, it's the old game. The government, the bureaucracy can do whatever they want, even with Khodorkovsky. How do you think we read it, being small guys in business? If that could happen to Khodorkovsky, what can happen to us? So that's why we kept under radar. So we knew that situation. I mean, the business people in Russia know the situation for all the time. And actually, the first signal was return to the Soviet anthem. That was the signal which was clear enough for many of us. Those who did not learn the lesson immediately, they learned it after Khodorkovsky situation. And so that's the problem. The problem is structural reform. And stagnation started before the oil price, but of course, with the fall of the oil price, the veneer of success, so to say, is swept away, and we and unfortunately Russian people face the reality. And the longer this political situation will continue, the more painful the lesson for Russian people will be.
Let me ask you, though, just to take that a step further. Again, is it that you see that this is going to just continue on, drag on this way?
Absolutely.
Or that there will be some kind of implosion economically that will have political consequences for the current government?
You know what? Both sides are right. Those who say that it can continue almost indefinitely, they are right. Yes, this kind of economy, which never actually transformed. I remember the same story more or less in the Soviet Union, except that it is now partly legalized. But there are a lot of there is a lot of activity on the low level, again below the radar, unregistered, untaxed, of course, and almost unnoticed by economists. That's the problem with many Western, including IMF and the World Bank, with all due respect. But many people miss the point. When I give you, I try to give you just a very, very simple example. When I grew up in Soviet bureaucracy, I was in Soviet Union. One day I was able to buy a Zhiguli, a small Soviet-made car, like Fiat, like old Fiat. And when I needed to repair the Fiat, I would go to a private garage of my friends or of friends of my friends by recommendation and pay a couple of rubles. That's market economy, right? It's not Soviet-directed economy, not Gosplan or Leonid Brezhnev. He did not know about that, right? It was not state-controlled. It was state-prohibited activity. But we all did it. I was a member of the Communist Party. The garage worker, the fixer there, he was probably too. I mean, so what? But I would go there. I would pay 3 rubles. That is probably at that time the price of the vodka bottle. And if he was my friend, we would drink it together in the end. But it's okay. So that kind of relationship. So there was a lot of activity inside a Soviet economy. The same kept. It actually never ended again, like the Cold War. It never ended. There is a lot of a legacy there. There is a lot of same tendencies, especially in economic life, that by definition so. You know, the economic life is very difficult to change. So, same story today. So there is a lot of things which happening, like car repairs. If you cannot repair Mercedes this way, of course, but you can buy today a Russian-made, whatever, Russian-made, very simple car, and most of the Western producers offer in Russia under their brand names, of course, much better cars than the Soviet or the Russian-made, but they are very simple. Usually they lack a lot of computer base, so it can be repaired, simply repaired in a garage. And those guys in the garage, they have now access to internet, so they can learn from the internet how to repair the car. So everything comes together again, and that kind of economy could last for very long. Why the other side is right? Because, I don't know why, but they are right. Because in 1999, yes, when I was elected by the Supreme Soviet to be a foreign minister, Russian foreign minister, I lost my fantastic position. I was head of international organizations, that is UN department in the Soviet Foreign Ministry. I had large, like almost like this one, office there, and government telephones and everything. And I was the youngest on that position in the Soviet Foreign Ministry. Even Lavrov was not at that position, despite we went to the same institute, and he's 3 years older than my humble self. But my position was higher than his at that time in the Soviet Union. So In the Russian foreign ministry, there was no foreign affairs, right? Because it was still inside the Soviet Union, and there cannot be. So it was a form of political opposition at the government. So I lost everything. I lost so-called payok, which was a nomenclature ability to go to a secluded or secret even shop and to pay a few rubles for very good basket of foods and a basket of things. So I lost all that, and my mother said, "What are you doing? I mean, what crazy act is that? You are going to that government which is nowhere. I mean, it's opposition, and you know how the opposition ends up in the Soviet Union." And that was first time. That was first time. Somehow, in responding to her and trying to calm her down, I said, "You know what? In a year time, or maybe 2 year time, there will be no Soviet Union and no Communist Party." And when I said that, I thought, am I crazy? I mean, I thought to myself, you should not tell this stupidity to your mother. I mean, you need to have a respect to your mother. And you know what? It did happen. How did I know that? I don't know. Still today, it's a mystery. There is a mystery in all that. Today, I do not exclude that in 2 years there will be no present government in Kremlin, and maybe a new Andrei coming to United States offering a new policy and something like that. You never know. This is a mystery. But yes, the hardships, as I said, the stagnated or actually declining economic situation, social situation, it declines much faster than many people thought. And that's the lesson which Russian people, unfortunately, have to learn. And I hope that the people learn it fast.
You, in a way, you've answered my second question. I did want to go into the politics and the political future of Russia. And by your last comment, in a way, a question I had was how vulnerable is President Putin and the current government in this? And I think you have made a reference to that, but let me take it a step further. There's a debate here in the United States about what his successor would look like. Some argue that it would be a time of transition, just like during the period of which you were part when Yeltsin emerged. And then there are others who will say that the situation politically might even be worse than it is now. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Again, both are right. Unfortunately, actually, whenever somebody comes and says, and there are guys even right here around, I think, who are already discussing what kind of government they will put together, with all due respect that they are opposition figures and that they are genuine, democratically minded, but it's a little bit too early, I think. And the course of this development is very complicated, very complicated. It was very complicated in my time, and I would have never dreamt of being a foreign minister in Yeltsin's government, or even to see a Yeltsin government, to have any power. When I joined Yeltsin government, we had no power, because all the power was, of course, with the Gorbachev, the Soviet government, and it was formed just of the existence of the democratic opposition. Again, even at that time, when I joined the group, I had very, very much doubt that we will be ever in real power. And it did happen. Unfortunately, I can't give you the answer, but also unfortunately, if this situation continues, and especially if foreign adventures, which I am a little surprised by the level of the foreign adventurism. I am really a little surprised. I am not surprised of the internal stagnation, both political and economic, as I said, based on my business experience, based on my political experience, but I was really surprised when the Crimea happened. I was even more surprised when Eastern Ukraine happened. And again, I'm still surprised by what is happening in Syria. I mean, Russian engagement-wise. If this trend, which is a little bit, I mean, I understand that they want to change the agenda or something, and I understand that a regime like this is inherently aggressive, like the Soviet Union, peaceful-minded Leonid Brezhnev. He was an old guy at that time. He was peaceful-minded, like good grandfather. We took him like a very good, reasonable kind of grandfather for all of us. He all of a sudden jumped to Afghanistan. So I know that's nothing to be surprised with, but when it comes every kind of 6 months or every year a new adventure, with this kind of, if that continues, and it seems to be in the cards, maybe the situation will be deteriorating much, much faster than one could expect. And then it might end up in chaos. That's my nightmare. It was my nightmare, actually, in the end of the Soviet Union. That's why we signed Yeltsin and other leaders of republics, and I was very active with that. That's why we agreed almost to anything but chaos in dissolving, in crumbling, collapsing this Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was collapsing daily, and at that moment when we were in Beloversky Push, when the agreement was signed, it was collapsing hourly. Every hour we had new feeling, new reports, new situations leading to total chaos. And probably worse, like unfortunately some of them came back, like aggression in Ukraine. But at that time it could have been much even worse, believe it or not. So we wanted to stop all that, to prevent that. And we jumped into that, and we succeeded, at least temporarily. But this time, again, with all due respect to my, some of them are good friends, democratic opposition there, it's very weak. It's not their fault, but that's just factual situation, because the press, the media is controlled and everything. So there is, I mean, no evident political life, no discussion of the situation. We have not even measurement of the people's, of what people actually think. I mean, you might argue that there are polls which indicate like 80% support for President Putin. But on the other hand, the same polls sometimes reflect considerable negativism to economic situation, to management situation, to more and more to job situation, and especially the earnings situation for the people. So, and again, I mean, the polls, imagine the poll in Russia. Yes, it might be even Pew, that is foreign polling. A voice, how it works, a voice comes through your receiver and says, I am American or whatever international poller, and I want your opinion on President Putin. Now, are you sure that it's the call from, you don't know who is calling actually, right? But what you know for sure, that they know who you are, because the telephones, like in America, they are registered, be it mobile phones or be it landline. So if your vote during the elections is probably have been probably miscounted and does not matter, why would you risk a stupid answer like, oh, I disapprove? Of course you will prefer to be on the safe side. So you say, yes, very much so. And the Soviet people, again, Russian people, they are used to that. We grew up in that situation. Every year, or 4 years, I don't remember exactly, but every now and then we were forced to go to cast ballot for the Communist Party. And I participated in this procedure for years. And it was just a ritual. Yes, you had to go to voting, but it was not election, it was voting procedure. So the same situation, more or less, is again back there. So how can you measure? I mean, if you cannot measure by vote, there are no genuine primaries. There is no free press by large. I mean, how do you know what is the mood of the people? So you are in uncharted waters, and that's where we were in the Soviet Union. All of a sudden, the monolith, the Soviet Union, I mean, superpower, just started to crumble, and you have to run to a hunting lodge in Belarusian woods to save at least something, you know, to stop the collapse. So could it happen again? Yeah. When? I don't know. But it might be tomorrow, might be in 10 years. That anybody who tells you that he knows when, it's like stock market. Anybody who tells you that he knows when and how the stock market will fluctuate is a charlatan.
All right. I was going to ask another question, but we're going to go to you. I'm going to forego my other question. So we're going to go to the back, we'll go here, and then we'll come over on this side. And if you could please introduce yourself.
Hi, Don Jensen, Johns Hopkins University. I was a junior embassy diplomat in 1993. It was good to see you again. My question is about NATO. I vaguely recall in our daily work with your ministry that there was a lot of favorable talk about NATO, and including the possibility of someday Russia even joining. Could you give us a sense of what your goals and expectations were at the time?
Okay.
Well, basically, I had no clear answer to whether we wanted to be actually member of NATO or not. But what we wanted to do, and that's what I argued if you remember, publicly all the time, we wanted to have a alliance type treaty or alliance type relationship with NATO. Why? Because it was clear that countries like Poland, like Czech Republic, I mean those countries in Eastern Europe, they are easy, so to say, to join. They can join just as another member. But Russia, due to a variety of reasons, starting from the nuclear superpower status which we inherited and which is still there, and to the large army we had, and also to our geographic position. We are largely in Asia. My first, actually, my probably second foreign trip, foreign visit as a foreign minister after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So that was probably January or February 1992, was to China. Many people think that I was going to the United States. I was not. I was in the United States with Yeltsin for the so-called Security Council Summit. But my first individual trip as a foreign minister, or second, my first trip was to Germany, because I wanted to reiterate, and that's what we did very, very quickly, to reiterate that there are no territorial dispute between Germany and Russia, bearing in mind the history of the Second World War and everything. So we wanted to be sure that they and we are on the same page, which was absolutely clearly stated, and we immediately signed a new bilateral treaty between Russia and Germany, confirming the frontiers and everything. That's why it was crucial to recognize the boundaries, the frontiers we inherited. And that's why I can't believe that Russia is violating the borders, the frontiers which inherited. I mean, it's unbelievable. But going back to that, so on my agenda, China was as high as the West, as the United States, without due respect, because it's a giant neighbor, and we have the longest land border with them. So it was crucially important. So bearing all that in mind, whether to be a member or not, but there was a way, and there's still a way, to have an alliance relationship, real alliance relationship with formal or regular NATO membership or not.
Okay. I think you had your hand up, the young lady, and then we'll come to Charles Gotti, the young lady there.
Thank you for your remarks. I'm Yo-Yo from Hong Kong Phoenix TV. My question will be more on the Asia-Pacific region. And you just talked about your experience with China, and U.S. has the policy of pivot to Asia recently. What do you think Russia's policy towards Asia-Pacific should be in the future, and also especially with the relationship with China and Japan and South Korea? And also my second question is about the nuclear crisis regarding to North Korea. U.S. and South Korea is in talks about deploying that system, and Russia and China expressed concerns over this deployment of that system. What's your opinion on the deployment? Also, what do you think it should be the policy, the strategy going forward to deal with North Korea nuclear crisis? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And could you pass the mic here to Charles Gotti, Dr. Gotti? He's right in front, right here. Thank you, because he'll be next. Thank you.
How long, how much time do we have?
We have,
for
I know she asked a very, very long question, but we have other questions. So I would say if you can give a crisp answer
Yeah,
to a very complex question.
China, I have to praise Putin's government that they did sign the border treaty with China, which we worked hard to produce. That's a reasonable compromise. It was a reasonable compromise, but the most important part is that now that was my idea from my first visit to China, to close the awful situation that we inherited from the Soviet Union, that longest, it's probably longest in the world, border between the Soviet Union or Russia and China was an open wound and an open question, and once even led to, if you remember, to the war, a local war there. So we worked on that, and I welcome and I praise the government, Putin's government, signing the treaty. So the border issue is solved with China, which is very important. Basically, what I wanted is a very, very close, good neighbor relations between Russia and China, economically, culturally, you name it. And that was achieved in my time, and it still seems to be the case till today, which is very good. I hope there won't be any kind of overt or open or covert aggression over that border. I hope it will never happen. So the only thing I would try to avoid, especially from Russian side and also from Chinese side, is to spoil this kind of good neighbor relations with any kind of attempt to make them relations anti the West, anti-America in particular, because that will spoil, and as much as there are overtones and attempts to do that, that ruins the benign base for a relationship, and that might draw both countries to a very, very dangerous and absolutely unnecessary course. And I always counted, after I left the government, I always counted on Chinese side. And I should say that still today, despite some press reports and despite some, of course, deviations, but basically, yes, the Chinese side lives up to my expectations, that they do not allow to draw them into anti-American alliance with either Russia or any other country, which testifies to their wise foreign policy in that sense. Unfortunately, from Russian side, I see a lot of overtures to that matter. So the basic answer with China is good neighbor relationship as much as possible, cross the agenda, cross the board, but no anti-Western or anti-Japanese or whatever, anti-Indian alliance. As to Korea, yes, we opened to, of course, to Republic of Korea, and I hope this relationship stands and continues. As to North Korea, yes, I mean, what to do with the North Korea, the Chinese probably know better than anyone. I hope that Russia does not play, which I don't know anymore, but does not play with North Korea like the Soviet Union used to. That might be another step into backwards, wrong direction, but so far as I know, but my knowledge is only from the media, it does not happen, and thanks God it would not happen, that the Russia will not come back to client relationship with North Korea. As how to stop the North Korea from nuclear ambitions, actually, I don't know. I hope China sooner or later will demonstrate soberness in that side, in that issue, and responsibility as they demonstrate with Russia not jumping to anti-American alliance.
Okay, Charles, you have the mic. Please.
Charles. Thank you. Charles Gotti, Johns Hopkins University. Very nice to see you and to listen to you again. The question that I have is, what do you think the United States could do to reduce the threat of chaos in Russia that you mentioned? Is there anything that the United States could do? The reason I ask this as a background, not for you so much, but for the audience, is that just 20 years ago this year, I was in your dining room discussing Chechnya, and not incidentally, you allowed me to publish that conversation there. And at that time, 1995, as much as you cared about human rights all your life, and I know a lot about that, nonetheless, you were concerned about Western criticism of Chechnya because you argued very clearly it just might help Zhirinovsky or the communists to gain power. It's quite a dilemma, of course, was for you as it has always been for the West. So my question is, against that background, what is there for the United States to do to make sure that the chaos in a country with so many nuclear weapons is avoided?
What I know for sure, that you cannot, the United States cannot do for us what we have to do ourselves. We, like Russian people. In that sense, I disagree with one of my friends and prominent figures here who is criticizing Obama administration and demanding like very, very tough policy or something. I don't share this view. It's for Russian people, and the ability to influence internal dynamics in Russia always was very limited for the United States and the West, and it's still there. It's still very, very limited. And again, even if you could do it for us, I would not recommend it to do, because, as I said, we, the Russian people, we have to learn the lesson that the Soviet or neo-Soviet, that the Cold War or return to the Cold War, it's against Russian people's and Russian nations' interest. It's against our national interest. And unfortunately, this lesson, I tried to argue that at that time, all the time, but unfortunately it's probably learned only by painful experience. Okay, in business I learned that no pain, no gain. I hope the pain would be limited. What the West could do, though, I mean, basically, I think the West is doing its part, as always. But I think it's important to understand the nature of the regime. I think it would be useful to name the situation as it is, that it is the old Cold War, probably limited, probably modified. That's important because when the United States did recognize that it was the Cold War, it helped. It helped to mobilize. It helped to mobilize the Western Europe. It helped to for the people, for business, for variety of stratas to clearly understand what was happening in the Soviet Union. That the Soviet Union was in Cold War. So I think starting from a little bit more direct recognition of the situation and reactions. Again, the reactions basically are, to my mind, are correct. I would hate the United States to go to kind of military conflict or something with Russia, like it never happened with the Soviet Union, even after Hungarian Revolution, as Professor Gatti knows much better than my humble self. But I think that the reaction could be quicker. That's important. I mean, when it comes much later, when after Crimea, it takes long time. I mean, that creates illusions on the Russian side. It creates. Let us remember that despite all those fundamental factors which I tried to describe, there are individual, there are psychological factors. So if you try something and you have an illusion that it will be tolerated, that you can, live up with that there will be no consequences, then you act much bolder next time. It encourages you to the next step. And I kind of think that the delayed and feeble initial reaction to actions in Ukraine, to Crimea, contributed partly. I mean, not that it was the reason, but it contributed partly to what happened next in eastern Ukraine. And it's very, I mean, it's unfair speaking, I mean, I'm still thinking partly on the other side. I mean, from Russian side, I think they would appreciate to have much clear responses from the West and from the United States in particular, to know what would be tolerated and what would not, what would meet with sanctions later and which would not, because they always, it seems to me that they always count on overcoming, that they will be able to get away with something, or probably I think some people in Kremlin still seem to think that sooner or later there would be what they call new Yalta, which is misinterpretation of what happened in Yalta. But this misinterpretation means that sooner or later the West, the United States, will agree to sit down at the table and start dividing the spheres of interest and maybe even redrawing borders in Europe or maybe elsewhere. I mean, that will never happen unless, of course, the new elections in America would drive us crazy. Me too. I mean, there is one candidate which might do even that, hopefully not. I mean, but looking to what I know of America, which I knew, it would never happen. So that should be very, very clearly expressed. I mean, it should be said clearly, so that those guys, that Russians do know what is possible, what is not, what is on the agenda. I think it's just what the great nation deserves on one hand, and that would help internal developments in Russia. If they know for sure the limits, that would probably help the society, that will help Russian people to avoid or try to stop the most dangerous adventures, and thus contribute to preventing the nightmare scenario of the collapse of the chaos. But of course, it's not decisive factor. Unfortunately, the West has no magic stick to that matter. It's inside Russia.
All right, we're going to take the gentleman, you had your hand up very early on in the corner there, and then we'll go here and we'll go here, okay? And I apologize, sorry. We're going to take three and then give you a chance to answer the three and we'll close.
Okay.
Okay? Could you stand up? It's hard to hear you. Sorry. Oh. For some reason, that mic isn't on. We can't hear it up here. That's why I was asking you to stand up, not for any other reason.
That's cool. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, then I'll start again. Thank you very much for your work, ma'am. I thoroughly admire it. Minister, my name's Steve Luckett. I work and study here in the city. From that podium, in fact, Mikhail Khodorkovsky spoke last year. You mentioned the signal sent to him. I wonder what signal was sent to Boris Nemtsov, or at least critics or people on his side. His daughter, likewise, spoke from that podium a few weeks back. My other question is, to the extent that Mr. Putin is grooming a successor, might it be Mr. Kadyrov? And if not, what do you think of him just the same? And my last is, what do you think of the relationship between the foreign minister, Lavrov, and Mr. Kerry? And thank you.
Okay, and then the gentleman, I think you had your hand up right there. Yes.
Rich Koslerich from George Mason University. A question about conflict in the Near Abroad. Could you contrast the Russian role in imposing a ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan just a few days ago with the ceasefire that was imposed at Bishkek in 1994?
Okay, and then the gentleman right here in front. We have he's in the fourth row here in front. If you put your hand up so she could see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yuri Charikov, the Cato Institute. I have two short questions. First, how do you think why the illustration in Russia didn't take place during this window of opportunities in the beginning of 90s? And do you think that the violent dissolution of the Russian parliament in 1993 was the first step towards authoritarianism?
Okay, did you hear all of these?
The
last one was hard for me
largely
too.
missed. And where are you from?
Cato Institute.
Cato Institute.
Yeah.
Cato Institute.
But what if could you? I apologize. I did not
Yeah,
get.
me too.
I'm
The
writing down.
Second question, yeah?
Please.
All right. Do you think that this violent dissolution of the Russian parliament in 1993 was the first step towards authoritarianism in Russia?
Okay. All right. So we had three people. We had like 7 questions. All right.
Jesus, I'm sorry. Could you remind
Yes.
me?
To go back on the first one, the gentleman was asking about after Putin, Kadyrov. That was one of the questions. What do you think of Foreign Minister Lavrov and the job he's doing? And then you also asked about Nemtsov, his the context of his being murdered.
Yes.
And the ramifications that it had.
First of all, I had always friendly and very respectful, and I admired Boris Nemtsov for his role and for his heroic, actually, stance there. That's what I could not force myself to do. Though, in parentheses, I had, and I still have, kind of this mysterious view of history. You know, sometimes you come out there, you join the barricades even, which I once did. But I did it not in the middle of the Soviet power, not in the middle, like some outstanding human rights activists, the one which joined us in my house at the dinner table, if Charles remembers. Sergei Kovalyov is this prominent human rights dissident in the Soviet Union. He went to the Gulag, and he spent, and he is my elder kind of friend, and again, very respectful figure. And I have personal, and I am proud having personal relations with him. It's admirable figure, but you know, they went to Gulag. Of course, it was not in vain, but that requires a degree of heroic personality, which I probably don't match, my humble self. But sometimes you go to the barricades, you go to active opposition, and you have a chance, as I said, you have a window of opportunity. So if I saw the window of opportunity, I would probably be there together with Boris, but I don't. And I did not see it a year ago or 2 years ago. Anyway, he made a heroic stance, and he paid for that. And the reason it happened is the same as Khodorkovsky. You know, the Khodorkovsky affair, his business affair, his legal, the legal ramifications of all that, that is not relevant. I mean, today I think the Hague court passed a negative judgment to his position, and that legal argument, it's all the legal kind of legal schmigel, which happens in business all the time. That's business part. But that was the message. The most important part of Khodorkovsky story was the message that even Khodorkovsky, even a billionaire, could be put in jail by the regime. This message, what mattered, and this message which we immediately kind of registered. The same with Nemtsov. He was killed not especially for something particular, I think, but that is a message that even Nemtsov, even a prominent figure in the West, prominent in Russia, I mean, outstanding personality and former almost successor to Boris Yeltsin. Yeltsin once named him a potential successor before he changed his mind to Mr. Putin. So if even this kind of figure could be killed, then forget it. There is no chance. So that's the meaning of that, and that's the significance of that.
He asked about Kadyrov.
Kadyrov, that remains to be seen. If situation slides to the chaos, everything is possible. But I do believe that there is a growing tension due to Kadyrov factor and due to some other developments in Russia. Believe me, there are very many patriotically minded people inside the bureaucracy, despite it's largely corrupt, but that was in the Soviet Union. And there are a lot of patriotic officers in Russian military forces, in security forces. I was elected in 1993 and 1995 in Murmansk area. I had 75% vote for me with all my pro-Western foreign policy and all that public advocacy of the democracy and everything, in the area where 75% of my constituency was made by officers and servicemen of the Russian Northern Fleet, the fleet which is still the core of Russian strategic nuclear marine power. The nuclear submarines are there. That's the bulk of Russian Navy nuclear power. So who were those guys? Those guys were the officers and the servicemen who, despite Soviet propaganda, did recognize that the confrontation, the next World War or whatever, that it leads nowhere, that I had a reasonable argument for partnership with the West. So the same is still there. You know, there are many reasonable people inside Russian society who certainly are as distressed by what is happening, including what is happening with our brother nation. After all, Syria or whatever, despite it's awful, but it's somewhere, you know, it's somebody. While bombing or while interfering, while having a war with on Ukrainian territory, devastating part of Ukrainian territory, it's our brothers. They are our brothers. They are independent nations. They are to decide for themselves. But that does not mean that they are our brothers. I mean, if I have a brother, of course he has his own life, and of course he can tell me, go mind your own business whenever he wants to. But he's still my brother, right? So I would not probably kill him. I would not take a knife and let blood for disagreement with him. So all that jabs Russian so I believe there are many, much more people inside bureaucracy, inside the military, inside security forces who are not happy with this kind of situation. So let's see how it works out.
Minister, we are past the time.
That was an important issue.
We're past the time, but I want to give you the three remaining.
Okay, I will be very brief. Yes.
So the last on the gentleman there, because I gave more chance for more questions. Lavrov was just a quick comment on Lavrov. Then there was the Armenia-Azerbaijan situation, and then the young man's
Lavrov and Kerry.
So if we wrap up in a few minutes.
Yes. That I already touched on that. Lavrov and Kerry, I would prefer a little bit more straightforwardness on the part of Secretary Kerry.
So Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Armenia and Azerbaijan, I don't know the details, but it seems to me that Russia flexed its muscle, its influence to stop the fighting. That's what I did, and that's what I tried to do. And unfortunately, there is not much else we can do. To be a kind of fair broker, it's difficult, but yeah, we have to try to stop the fighting there, at least. But because they are also our brothers, not probably direct, but brothers-in-law. So I would very much encourage Russia and any other, like I did, like Western countries, to try to at least prevent the bloodshed there.
And the last was just the 1993, you said the parliamentary
Oh,
right.
that's long issue. No, I don't
I
think.
think we're just going to answer one.
No, I don't think that led to tyranny. We had no other way out of constitutional crisis at that time. Could it be done a little kind of in different mode? Perhaps. I don't know. That I was not engaged in those negotiations. Inside there, I had to concentrate on my portfolio, on foreign policy portfolio. Of course, there is always room for probably better way to negotiate something, but basically it was inevitable. It was a confrontation which by that time went so far that the so-called Soviet parliament had to be stopped. Maybe at an earlier stages, and I actually argued for that, at an earlier stages, it could have been probably prevented, but by October, by 1993, it was already irreversible. It went too far. In 1992, it probably could be dealt with differently.
Minister Kozyrev, clearly we needed more time for this discussion because you gave very considered answers here, but thank you very much for coming. Please join me. Thank you very much.